At my son's fancy dinner table, my grandson slipped me a note that said, "Don't eat the food." What happened next would shock everyone watching this video. The lamb shank on my plate looked perfect, glazed with something dark and rich, exactly the kind of expensive meal Malcolm and Vanessa always served. But as I reached for my fork, Caleb's hand darted under the table and pressed something into my palm. A crumpled note, hastily scribbled in pencil. "Don't eat the food." My heart lurched. For a moment I thought it must be a joke. But Caleb's face was pale, his eyes darting toward his parents, then back at me. I tucked the note under my sleeve, forcing a smile as Vanessa poured my wine. The conversation buzzed around me like static, Vanessa boasting about their new vacation home, Malcolm laughing too loudly. But my mind was spinning. Was it food poisoning? An allergy prank? Something worse? The invitation had arrived in my mailbox like a wound wrapped in fancy paper. Ms. Henrietta Cole, Caleb's grandmother, as if I were some distant relation they tolerated out of obligation. 62 years of life, 38 of them spent raising Malcolm alone, and this was how they addressed me. But something about this dinner invitation felt off, like a trap wrapped in silk. Still, hope is a stubborn thing. Maybe, I told myself, they were finally ready to bring me back into the fold. Maybe Malcolm had remembered the woman who sold her wedding ring to pay his college deposit. So I spent my last $70 on a teal dress from the thrift store and baked Caleb's favorite butter cookies. The evening of the dinner, their mansion felt more like a museum than a home. White marble floors that echoed every footstep. No family photos anywhere. Just cold, expensive emptiness. Vanessa greeted me with that same brittle smile she'd perfected over the years, her eyes sweeping over my dress like she was pricing a yard sale find. But I wasn't about to let her know I'd been watching. Malcolm at 8 years old, holding my hand as we walked to school. "Mama, when I'm big, I'm gonna buy you a house with a garden." His little hand in mine, sticky from the candy I'd saved for weeks to buy him. The man who'd let me struggle on Social Security while he lived in a mansion. The man who'd never offered to help with my bills, who'd never invited me to visit, who'd treated me like a burden. The wedding photo behind my living room clock, unframed, hidden. Malcolm hadn't just excluded me from his wedding. He'd excluded me from his entire life. The table was set like something from a magazine, crystal glasses, lamb shank glazed with something dark and rich, imported wine bottles that probably cost more than my monthly Social Security check. Malcolm barely made eye contact when I arrived. Just nodded toward my chair like I was a business associate he had to tolerate. But when my eyes met Caleb's across that fancy table, something flickered in his fear. Real fear. As everyone settled in, I reached for my napkin. That's when Caleb's hand darted under the table and pressed something into my palm, a crumpled note, hastily scribbled in pencil. "Don't eat the food." My heart lurched. For a moment I thought it must be some kind of joke. But Caleb's face was pale, his eyes darting toward his parents, then back at me. I tucked the note under my sleeve, forcing a smile as Vanessa poured my wine. The conversation buzzed around me like static, Vanessa boasting about their new vacation home, Malcolm laughing too loudly. My mind spun. Was it food poisoning? An allergy prank? Something worse? I pretended to sip, watching carefully. Vanessa kept glancing at my plate, as though waiting for something. Malcolm seemed tense, pushing his lamb around without eating. Caleb sat frozen, hands in his lap. And then I noticed something. Near the kitchen door, their dog Bramble had slunk into the room. The moment he sniffed one of the lamb bones on an unattended plate, Vanessa snapped, lunging out of her chair to snatch the bone away, panic flashing across her face. It wasn't anger. It was fear. That was the moment I knew. Something on that table wasn't just food. I forced a cough, and muttered an apology about my blood sugar acting up. I slipped my untouched plate into my bag, claiming I'd eat later. Vanessa's smile faltered, and Caleb's shoulders loosened just slightly, relief. But what I didn't know yet was that Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. When I got home that night, I wrapped the lamb in foil and slid it into my freezer. The next morning, I quietly brought it to my trusted neighbor, Dr. Lionel Graves, a retired veterinarian who still had access to basic testing equipment. By evening, he called me in a shaky voice. "There's a powerful sedative in this. Ingesting enough could stop someone's heart." My legs gave out. Someone had tried to drug me, and the only people who could have done it were my own son and his wife. From that moment, I stopped being the quiet, forgiving mother they'd always underestimated. I knew I'd need proof, more than a lab slip from an old vet. And I knew I had to protect Caleb, who had risked everything by warning me. So I smiled, stayed silent, and began to plan. Because if Malcolm and Vanessa thought I was still the soft-hearted woman who sold her wedding ring for her son's future, they were about to learn how dangerous a betrayed grandmother could be. But the real shock was yet to come, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my own son. When I took that poisoned food to my neighbor, a retired vet, his phone call that evening made my legs give out completely. Dr. Lionel Graves had been my neighbor for 23 years. A gentle man with kind eyes and hands that had saved more animals than most people had pets. When I knocked on his door at 7 in the morning, holding that foil-wrapped package like it contained a bomb, he took one look at my face and didn't ask questions. "Come in, Henrietta," he said, stepping aside. "Coffee's brewing." His kitchen smelled like cinnamon and old books. The same kitchen where I'd brought Malcolm when he was 8 and had stepped on a rusty nail. Dr. Graves had stitched him up while I held his hand, promising him he'd be brave. Now I was bringing him evidence that my grown son had tried to kill me. Malcolm's childhood accident, the way he'd squeezed my hand, trusting me completely. "Mama, will it hurt?" And I'd promised him it wouldn't, because mothers always promise their children's safety. The contrast between that trusting boy and the man who'd invited me to dinner with poison. How do you go from "Mama, will it hurt?" to "Let's kill Mama"? Dr. Graves' gentle hands, the same ones that had comforted Malcolm, now examining evidence of his betrayal. The weight of that irony pressed against my chest. Dr. Graves set up his old equipment on the kitchen table. "I'll need to run a few tests," he said quietly. "This might take a few hours." I nodded, but my mind was spinning. What if I was wrong? What if Caleb's note had been some kind of teenage prank? What if I was about to accuse my own son of attempted murder based on a child's warning? But then I remembered Vanessa's panic when the dog approached those bones. That wasn't the reaction of someone serving normal food. The hours of waiting felt like years. Every minute stretched into eternity as I sat in Dr. Graves' living room, staring at family photos on his walls. Happy families. Trusting children. The kind of family I thought we were. My phone buzzed with a text from Malcolm. "Hope you enjoyed dinner, Mom. We should do this more often." The casual cruelty of that message made me physically ill. At 6:30 that evening, Dr. Graves' phone rang. He answered, listened, then hung up without saying a word. When he turned to me, his face was ashen. "Henrietta," he said quietly, "there's something I need to show you." He led me to his small lab setup in the garage. On the computer screen, chemical analysis results glowed in harsh, white light. The numbers and graphs meant nothing to me, but Dr. Graves' expression told me everything. "This isn't food poisoning, Henrietta. This isn't an accident. What is it?" My voice sounded small, like a child's. "A powerful sedative. Ingesting enough could stop someone's heart. Make it look like natural causes." The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to steady myself. Dr. Graves continued, his voice gentle but firm. Someone didn't just want to make you sick, Henrietta. They wanted you dead. And they wanted it to look like your heart just stopped. I thought of Malcolm pouring my wine, Vanessa watching my plate, Caleb's terrified eyes. The realization hit me like a physical blow. My own son had tried to kill me. Not just hurt me, not just exclude me. Kill me. The boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, had looked into my eyes and poured poison into my glass. But then I thought of Caleb, 15 years old, risking everything to warn me. He'd known. He'd known what his parents were planning, and he'd chosen me over them. Dr. Graves printed out the test results and handed them to me. You'll need more than this, he said. You'll need witnesses, documentation, proof that this wasn't just a terrible accident. I nodded, but my mind was already racing ahead. If Malcolm and Vanessa had tried to kill me once, they'd try again. And next time, Caleb might not be able to warn me. I thought of all the times I defended Malcolm to others. He's just busy with work. Vanessa's just protective of Caleb. How many red flags had I ignored because I wanted to believe my son still loved me? From that moment, I stopped being the quiet, forgiving mother they'd always underestimated. I knew I'd need proof, more than a lab slip from an old vet. And I knew I had to protect Caleb, who had risked everything by warning me. So I smiled, stayed silent, and began to plan. Because if Malcolm and Vanessa thought I was still the soft-hearted woman who sold her wedding ring for her son's future, they were about to learn how dangerous a betrayed grandmother could be. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. As I started digging into my son's life, I discovered he wasn't just trying to kill me. He'd been lying about everything for years. The morning after Dr. Graves' revelation, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers that would shatter every illusion I'd held about my son. Malcolm had always been secretive about his finances, claiming business confidentiality whenever I asked about his work. But now I needed answers. I started with what I knew. Malcolm worked for a regional distribution company, or so he'd told me. He'd mentioned promotions, bonuses, the stress of management. But as I began digging through public records and business filings, a different story emerged. Malcolm, at 10 years old, sitting at this same table, promising me, "Mama, when I'm successful, I'm going to take care of you. You won't have to worry about money ever again." The earnestness in his voice had been so real. The contrast with the man who'd let me struggle on Social Security while he lived in a mansion. The man who'd never offered to help with my bills, who'd never invited me to visit, who'd treated me like a burden. The wedding photo behind my living room clock, unframed, hidden. Malcolm hadn't just excluded me from his wedding. He'd excluded me from his entire life. The first discovery hit me like a physical blow. Malcolm's regional director position? It didn't exist. The company he claimed to work for had no record of him in any management capacity. He was listed as a mid-level sales representative, making maybe $60,000 a year. But Vanessa's family money, that was real. And it was gone. I found bankruptcy filings for Vanessa's parents from 2 years ago. They'd lost everything, their business, their home, their savings. Malcolm hadn't married into wealth. He'd married into debt. The mansion they lived in? Rented. The expensive cars? Leased. The lifestyle they flaunted? Built on lies and credit cards maxed to the limit. But the most chilling discovery came when I searched Malcolm's name in court records. 3 separate lawsuits for unpaid debts. A foreclosure notice on a property I'd never known he owned. And then the insurance policy. The life insurance policy had been taken out 6 months ago. $500,000. Premiums Malcolm could barely afford, paid religiously every month. The beneficiary? Vanessa Cole. I thought of Malcolm's recent promotion, the dinner invitation that had started this nightmare. He'd been planning my murder for 6 months, paying premiums he couldn't afford, waiting for the perfect opportunity. But why now? Why, after all these years of ignoring me, excluding me, treating me like a stranger? The answer came when I found Vanessa's medical records. Vanessa's condition wasn't life-threatening, but it was expensive. Monthly treatments, medications, specialists. Without insurance coverage, the costs would bankrupt them completely. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Malcolm hadn't just decided to kill me on a whim. He'd been desperate, backed into a corner by debt and medical bills. My death wasn't personal, it was financial. But that made it worse somehow. The boy I'd raised, the man I'd loved unconditionally, had reduced my life to a dollar amount. $500,000. That's what my existence was worth to him. As I sat there, absorbing the full scope of their betrayal, my phone buzzed. A text from Malcolm. "Mom, Vanessa and I were thinking about having you over for dinner again this weekend. We'd love to make up for last time." They were going to try again. This weekend. While I sat there with proof of their first attempt, they were already planning the second. But then I thought of Caleb. 15 years old, caught between parents who wanted to kill his grandmother and a grandmother who was about to destroy his family. What choice did he have? I realized I must protect Caleb while gathering evidence against his parents. My maternal instincts override my desire for justice. I printed out everything. The insurance policy, the bankruptcy filings, the medical records, Dr. Graves' test results. Evidence that would destroy Malcolm and Vanessa, but might also destroy Caleb's world. I thought of all the times Caleb had come to me for comfort, all the secrets he'd shared, all the trust he'd placed in me. Could I really be the one to shatter his family? I owed it to him to end this nightmare. I owed it to him to protect him from parents who would kill his grandmother for money. So I smiled, stayed silent, and began to plan. Because if Malcolm and Vanessa thought I was still the soft-hearted woman who sold her wedding ring for her son's future, they were about to learn how dangerous a betrayed grandmother could be. But Caleb had been listening to his parents' conversations, and what he'd heard would change everything. When I found the life insurance policy my son took out on me for $500,000, I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was premeditated murder. The knock on my door came at 9:30 that evening. I wasn't expecting anyone, and after discovering Malcolm's insurance policy, I wasn't sure I wanted to see anyone. But when I peered through the peephole, my heart stopped. Caleb stood on my porch, his backpack slung over one shoulder, his face pale and drawn. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I opened the door, and he practically fell into my arms. "Grandma," he whispered, his voice cracking. I heard them talking. I heard everything. Caleb's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone. His eyes were red-rimmed, like he'd been crying. The weight of what he'd come to tell me pressed against my chest like a physical thing. Flashback to Caleb as a little boy, running to me with scraped knees, trusting me to make everything better. The same trust in his eyes now, but mixed with something darker, fear. This 15-year-old boy had been carrying secrets that would destroy his world. The contrast between the innocent child I'd known and the young man standing before me, burdened with knowledge no child should have to bear. Caleb collapsed onto my couch, his hand shaking as he pulled out his phone. "I recorded them," he said quietly, "last night. They thought I was asleep, but I heard them in the kitchen." The horror of realizing Caleb had been listening to his parents plan my murder. What kind of psychological damage had that done to him? The courage it must have taken for him to record evidence against his own parents. The loyalty he'd shown me, even when it meant betraying his family. As Caleb played the recording, Malcolm's voice filled my living room. "The insurance policy is active. We just need to make it look natural. Heart attack, maybe. She's getting older anyway. Vanessa's voice, cold and calculating. We can't afford to wait. The medical bills are killing us. If we don't get that money soon, we'll lose everything. Malcolm's response, I know, baby. But we have to be careful. If anyone suspects, we'll lose everything. We need to make it look like natural causes. Caleb reveals his internal conflict. He loves his parents, but can't ignore what they're planning. He's forced to choose between family loyalty and moral right. But the most chilling part came next. Vanessa's voice, filled with something that sounded almost like excitement. The good news is, she trusts us completely. She'll never suspect anything. And if something goes wrong, well, accidents happen. The realization that they'd been counting on my trust, using my love for them as a weapon against me. The ultimate betrayal. Caleb's voice on the recording, asking from his bedroom, Mom? Dad? What are you talking about? And Malcolm's response, Nothing, son. Go back to sleep. The recording ends with Vanessa saying, We'll try again this weekend. If it doesn't work, we'll figure out another way. Caleb looked up at me, tears streaming down his face. Grandma, I don't know what to do. They're my parents, but they're planning to kill you. How do I choose? The weight of that question crushed me. This child was being forced to choose between his parents and his grandmother, between family loyalty and moral right. I thought of all the times I'd comforted Caleb, all the secrets he'd shared with me, all the trust he'd placed in me. Now I had to ask him to help me destroy his family. I realized I must protect Caleb while gathering evidence against his parents. My maternal instincts override my desire for justice. I took Caleb's hand in mine. You don't have to choose, I said quietly. But I need you to understand something. What your parents are planning isn't just wrong, it's evil. And I won't let them hurt you. The determination in my voice surprised even me. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for Caleb's future. Caleb's response, I know, Grandma. That's why I came here. I can't let them do this to you. The bond between us strengthened in that moment. We weren't just grandmother and grandson. We were allies in a fight for survival. The revelation that a teenager chose to protect his grandmother over his parents taps into universal themes of moral courage and family loyalty. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. My neighbor Dr. Graves had been keeping a secret about my son that would change everything, and it wasn't about the poison food. The morning after Caleb's revelation, I sat in Dr. Graves' kitchen again, but this time the weight of what I'd learned pressed against my chest like a physical thing. The insurance policy, the recording, the months of planning, it all felt like too much to process. Dr. Graves set a fresh cup of coffee in front of me, his expression grave. Henrietta, he said quietly, there's something I need to tell you about Malcolm. I looked up, surprised. What do you mean? He sat across from me, his weathered hands clasped together. Malcolm has been coming to see me for months. Not for medical reasons, for consultations. Flashback to Malcolm as a child, bringing injured animals to Dr. Graves, learning about compassion and care. The same boy who'd grown into a man planning murder. The betrayal of Dr. Graves' trust. He'd been treating Malcolm like a son for years, and Malcolm had been using that relationship to research how to kill me. The sickening realization that Malcolm had been planning this for months, using Dr. Graves' medical knowledge against me. Dr. Graves pulled out a folder from his desk. He's been asking about undetectable substances, he said quietly. Heart medications, sedatives, things that could make death look natural. As Dr. Graves opened the folder, I saw pages of notes in Malcolm's handwriting. Medical terminology, dosages, timing. This wasn't just a plan, it was a detailed study. The horror of realizing Malcolm had been studying my medical history, researching the best way to kill me without suspicion. Dr. Graves' voice, filled with regret. I thought he was just curious about medical science. I never imagined. Dr. Graves spread the papers across the table. He's been researching your medical history, he said quietly. Your heart condition, your medications, your routine. He knows everything about your health. The violation of privacy, the way Malcolm had been studying me like a specimen, planning my death with clinical precision. Dr. Graves' next words, he asked me about undetectable substances that could interact with your heart medication. I told him I couldn't help with that, but he kept asking. Dr. Graves reveals his internal conflict. He'd been trying to help Malcolm, but Malcolm had been using that help to plan murder. But the most chilling discovery came next. Dr. Graves pulled out another folder. He's been researching other cases, he said quietly. Elderly deaths that looked like natural causes. He's been studying how to make murder look like heart failure. The realization that Malcolm had been studying murder cases, learning from other killers, perfecting his technique. Dr. Graves' voice, filled with horror. He's been planning this for 6 months, Henrietta. Every detail, every contingency. He's not just trying to kill you, he's trying to get away with it. The revelation that Malcolm had been studying other murder cases creates urgency. He wasn't just planning to kill me, he was planning to get away with it. Dr. Graves looked at me with tears in his eyes. I should have known, he said quietly. I should have seen what he was planning. But I trusted him. I thought he was just curious about medical science. The weight of Dr. Graves' guilt, the way he'd been manipulated by Malcolm, the way his trust had been betrayed. My response, you couldn't have known. Malcolm is good at hiding who he really is. He's been hiding it from me for years. I realized I'm not alone in being betrayed by Malcolm. Dr. Graves has been manipulated too, creating a bond between us. But then Dr. Graves revealed something that would change everything. Henrietta, there's something else. Malcolm has been asking about your will. He wants to know what happens to your house if you die. Dr. Graves took my hand. Henrietta, we need to stop him. Not just for you, but for Caleb. That boy doesn't deserve to grow up with parents who would kill his grandmother. The determination in Dr. Graves' voice surprised me. He wasn't just offering to help. He was committing to stopping Malcolm. My response, but how? We have evidence, but we need more. We need proof that will hold up in court. The bond between us strengthened in that moment. We weren't just neighbors. We were allies in a fight for justice. The revelation that a trusted neighbor had been manipulated by a killer taps into universal fears about trusting the wrong people. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. When my son called to invite me to another family dinner, I knew exactly what he was planning, and this time, I was ready. The phone rang at exactly 7:30 p.m., just like I'd expected. Malcolm's voice on the other end was warm, almost affectionate, the voice he'd used when he was a child trying to convince me to let him stay up past bedtime. Mom, he said, Vanessa and I were thinking about having you over for dinner again this weekend. We'd love to make up for last time. I could hear the desperation in his voice, the subtle panic that came from someone who'd run out of options. The insurance premiums were due, Vanessa's medical bills were mounting, and they needed that money now. I forced my voice to sound excited. Oh, Malcolm, that sounds wonderful. I'd love to come. What time should I be there? Flashback to Malcolm as a child, asking for permission to stay up late, using that same wheedling tone. The boy who'd grown into a man planning murder. The sickening realization that Malcolm was using our shared history, our mother-son bond, as a weapon against me. The contrast between the warm invitation and the cold calculation behind it. He wasn't inviting me to dinner. He was inviting me to my own funeral. Malcolm's response, filled with relief. Great. How about Saturday at 7? We'll have something special prepared. The casual way he mentioned something special, The same phrase he'd used before the poison dinner. He was planning to try again. The performance I was putting on, pretending to be the trusting mother he remembered, while knowing exactly what he was planning. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the phone. This was it. The moment I'd been preparing for. But I wasn't going to walk into their trap. I was going to set my own. The determination that filled me, the way I'd transformed from victim to strategist. Malcolm had underestimated me for years, but he was about to learn how dangerous a betrayed grandmother could be. I thought of Caleb, the boy who'd risked everything to warn me, the child who'd chosen me over his parents. I owed it to him to end this nightmare. I evolved from passive victim to active strategist. I stop reacting and start planning. I called Dr. Graves. "It's happening this weekend," I said quietly. "I need you to be ready." The weight of what I was asking Dr. Graves to do, to help me trap his own neighbor, to expose a man he'd trusted for years. Dr. Graves' response: "I'm ready, Henrietta. We'll stop him together." The bond between us strengthened in that moment. We weren't just neighbors, we were allies in a fight for justice. But then Dr. Graves revealed something that would change everything. "Henrietta, there's something else. Malcolm has been asking about your will. He wants to know what happens to your house if you die." I spent the next 2 days preparing. I bought a small recording device hidden in a brooch that had belonged to my mother. I prepared a fake medication bottle filled with harmless pills that looked like my heart medication. I even practiced my performance. The trusting mother, the grateful grandmother, the woman who'd never suspect her own son. The irony of using my mother's brooch to record evidence against my son. The way family heirlooms were being used to expose family betrayal. The determination that filled me as I prepared for battle. This wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. I become a master strategist, using my knowledge of Malcolm's weaknesses against him. The question of whether my trap will work creates tension. Will Malcolm fall for it? Will I be able to gather enough evidence? The night before the dinner, Caleb called me. "Grandma," he whispered, "they're acting weird. Dad's been on the phone all day, and Mom keeps checking the kitchen. I think they're planning something." The protective instinct that filled me, the way I wanted to shield Caleb from what was about to happen. My response: "I know, sweetheart. But don't worry. I'm going to take care of this. I'm going to protect you." The bond between us strengthened in that moment. We weren't just grandmother and grandson. We were allies in a fight for survival. The revelation that a grandmother is planning to trap her own son taps into universal themes of justice and family betrayal. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. As I sat at their table for the second time, I watched my son pour wine into my glass with shaking hands, and I knew this was the night he planned to kill me. The drive to Malcolm and Vanessa's mansion felt like a journey to my own execution. But this time, I wasn't walking into their trap, I was walking into my own. I dressed carefully, the same teal dress from before, but this time with my mother's brooch pinned to the collar. Hidden inside, a tiny recording device that would capture every word, every gesture, every moment of their betrayal. When I arrived, the house felt different. Colder, more calculated. The same expensive setting, but now I could see it for what it was, a stage for murder. Vanessa greeted me with that same brittle smile, but this time I could see the calculation behind it. "Henrietta, how wonderful to see you again. Malcolm has been so looking forward to this." Family dinners when Malcolm was young, the warmth and laughter that had filled our home. The contrast with this cold, calculated setting. The weight of what I was about to do, to trap my own son, to expose his betrayal, to destroy his family. The determination that filled me as I prepared for battle. This wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. Malcolm's appearance. He looked haggard, desperate, like a man who'd run out of options. The pressure was getting to him. The performance she was putting on, pretending to be the welcoming daughter-in-law while planning my murder. The question of whether Malcolm will be able to maintain his composure creates tension. Will he crack under pressure? Will he reveal his plan? As we sat down to dinner, I played my part perfectly. The grateful grandmother, the trusting mother, the woman who'd never suspect her own son. I complimented the food, asked about their work, pretended to be excited about their future plans. The sickening irony of our conversation, discussing their future while they planned to end mine. Malcolm's nervousness, the way his hands shook as he poured my wine, the way he avoided my eyes. I become a master performer, using my knowledge of Malcolm's weaknesses against him. But then, just as Malcolm was about to serve the main course, I saw it. The subtle exchange between him and Vanessa, the way she nodded toward my plate, the way he hesitated before serving me. The moment I realized they were about to try again, the way my heart raced as I prepared to spring my trap. The determination that filled me as I decided to act. This was it, the moment of truth. The question of whether my trap will work creates urgency. Will I be able to gather enough evidence? Will Malcolm fall for it? I stood up slowly, my voice calm but firm. Malcolm, I said quietly, I know what you're planning. I know about the insurance policy. I know about the poison. I know everything. The shock on Malcolm's face, the way his carefully constructed facade crumbled in an instant. Vanessa's response, "What are you talking about? We don't know what you mean." I reveal my true strength, confronting my son with the truth and forcing him to face his betrayal. But then Malcolm did something I never expected. He lunged across the table, grabbing my wine glass and forcing it to my lips. "Drink it," he hissed.
"Drink it now."
I struggled, but Malcolm was stronger, more desperate. The wine spilled down my chin, and I could taste the bitter tang of whatever he'd put in it. But I'd prepared for this. The fake medication I'd taken earlier would neutralize most poisons. The horror of realizing Malcolm was willing to force poison down my throat, to kill me with his own hands. The betrayal of trust, the way my own son was willing to murder me in cold blood. The determination that filled me as I prepared to fight back. This wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. The revelation that a son admits to planning his mother's murder taps into universal themes of family betrayal and moral corruption. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. When I died at their table, my son's first words weren't grief. They were relief. And what he said next made my blood run cold. I let my body go limp, pretending the poison had taken effect. My eyes rolled back, my breathing became shallow, and I collapsed onto the table. Malcolm's first words, "Finally. It's about time." Vanessa's voice, cold and calculating. "Are you sure she's dead? We can't afford any mistakes." The horror of realizing Malcolm was willing to force poison down my throat, to kill me with his own hands. The betrayal of trust, the way my own son was willing to murder me in cold blood. The determination that filled me as I prepared to fight back. This wasn't just about survival, it was about justice. Malcolm's response, "She's dead." The poison was strong enough to stop her heart. It'll look like natural causes. The casual way they discussed my death, as if I were an obstacle to be removed rather than a person to be loved. Malcolm reveals his true nature, cold, calculating, willing to murder his own mother for money. But then Malcolm continued, his voice filled with something that might have been relief. "We've been planning this for months," he said quietly. "The insurance policy, the research, the timing. Everything was calculated." The revelation that Malcolm had been planning my murder for months, studying every detail, perfecting his technique. Vanessa's response, "We had to do it. The medical bills are killing us. We need that money to survive." The question of whether Malcolm will reveal more about his plan creates urgency. What other details will he confess? What other evidence will he provide? Malcolm's voice, filled with something that might have been regret. I never wanted to hurt her. But we're desperate. We need that money to pay Vanessa's medical bills, to keep our house, to survive. The casual way he justified my murder, as if it were just a business transaction. Vanessa's response. She was old anyway. She had a good life. It's not like we're killing a child. Vanessa reveals her true nature, cold, calculating, willing to murder her mother-in-law for money. But then Malcolm revealed something that would change everything. The good news is, we'll get the house too. She never updated her will. Everything goes to me. The weight of his confession, the way he'd admitted to planning my murder while claiming he never wanted to hurt me. The casual way they discussed my death, as if I were an obstacle to be removed rather than a person to be loved. Malcolm reveals his true nature, cold, calculating, willing to murder his own mother for money. But then I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching. Dr. Graves, followed by 2 police officers, entered the dining room. The shock on Malcolm's face, the way his carefully constructed plan crumbled in an instant. My response: I'm not dead, Malcolm. And I have everything on tape. The moment of justice, the way Malcolm and Vanessa's plan had failed completely. The revelation that a grandmother trapped her own son using hidden recording equipment taps into universal themes of justice and family betrayal. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. When I stood up from that table and looked my son in the eye, I wasn't the weak, forgiving mother he remembered. I was a woman who'd been pushed too far. The moment the police officers entered the room, Malcolm's face went white. He looked at me with something that might have been horror, realizing that his carefully constructed plan had failed completely. "Mom," he whispered, "what did you do?" I stood up slowly, my voice calm but firm. "I did what any mother would do, Malcolm. I protected myself from my own son. The weight of what I'd done, trapping my own son, exposing his betrayal, destroying his family. The determination that filled me as I prepared to face the consequences of my actions. The contrast between the trusting mother Malcolm remembered and the determined woman standing before him. Malcolm's voice, filled with desperation. "Mom, please. We can work this out. We're family. We can fix this." The casual way he tried to manipulate me, using our family bond as a weapon against me. My response: family doesn't try to kill each other, Malcolm. Family doesn't plan murder for months. The question of whether Malcolm will try to escape creates tension. Will he run? Will he fight? Will he try to manipulate me? Vanessa's voice, cold and calculating. "You don't understand. We're desperate. We need that money to survive." The casual way she justified my murder, as if it were just a business transaction. My response: "You're not desperate, Vanessa. You're evil. And I won't let you hurt Caleb." I reveal my true strength, confronting my son and daughter-in-law with the truth and forcing them to face their betrayal. But then Malcolm did something I never expected. He fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "Mom," he sobbed, "I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. But we're desperate. We need that money to pay Vanessa's medical bills, to keep our house, to survive." The shock of seeing Malcolm break down, the way his carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. The weight of his confession, the way he admitted to planning my murder while claiming he never wanted to hurt me. The question of whether Malcolm's breakdown is genuine creates tension. Is he truly remorseful? Or is he trying to manipulate me? I looked at my son, the boy I'd raised alone, the man who'd planned my murder, and I felt something I'd never felt before. Not anger, not hatred, but something colder. Disappointment. The realization that Malcolm wasn't the son I'd raised. He was a stranger who'd been using me for years. My response, "You're not my son anymore, Malcolm. You're just a man who tried to kill me." I finally accept the truth about Malcolm, letting go of the son I'd loved and accepting the reality of who he'd become. But then Malcolm revealed something that would change everything. "Mom, please. I have cancer.
I'm dying.
That's why we need the money."
For my treatment.
As the police officers led Malcolm and Vanessa away, I stood in the dining room, surrounded by the evidence of their betrayal. The poisoned food, the insurance policy, the recording of their confession. The relief that filled me, the way I finally felt safe from their betrayal. The determination that filled me as I prepared to rebuild my life, without the son I'd loved. The moment of justice, the way Malcolm and Vanessa's plan had failed completely. The revelation that a grandmother successfully trapped her own son taps into universal themes of justice and family betrayal. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. As the police handcuffed my son, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. The courtroom felt like a morgue. Cold, sterile, filled with people who'd come to witness the destruction of a family. But I wasn't there to mourn. I was there to ensure justice was served. Malcolm sat at the defense table, his lawyer whispering frantically in his ear. Vanessa sat beside him, her face pale and drawn. They looked like strangers to me now, people I'd never known. The prosecutor, a young woman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, approached the stand. "Miss Cole," she said quietly, "can you tell the court what happened on the night of October 15th? Malcolm as a child, sitting in my lap, trusting me completely. The contrast with the man sitting in the defendant's chair. The weight of what I was about to do, to testify against my own son, to destroy his life, to ensure he faced justice. The determination that filled me as I prepared to speak the truth, no matter how painful. I told the court everything. The insurance policy, the poisoned food, the months of planning, the recording of their confession. Every detail, every moment, every betrayal. The way Malcolm's face crumbled as I spoke, the way he realized there was no escape from the truth. Vanessa's response, "She's lying. She's trying to destroy our family." The question of whether the evidence will be enough creates tension. Will Malcolm be convicted? Will justice be served? But then the prosecutor played the recording. Malcolm's voice filled the courtroom, confessing to everything. The insurance policy, the poison, the months of planning. Every word, every detail, every betrayal. The shock on Malcolm's face, the way he realized there was no escape from the truth. The weight of his confession, the way he'd admitted to planning my murder while claiming he never wanted to hurt me. Malcolm is forced to face the truth about himself, realizing he can no longer hide behind lies and manipulation. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. 3 hours of waiting, of wondering, of hoping that justice would be served. The tension of waiting, the way every minute felt like an eternity. The moment the foreman stood up, "We find the defendant guilty of attempted murder and insurance fraud." The moment of justice, the way Malcolm and Vanessa's plan had failed completely. The question of what will happen to Malcolm creates tension. Will he be sentenced to prison? Will he face justice? The judge looked at Malcolm with something that might have been pity. "Mr. Cole," he said quietly, "you plan to murder your own mother for money. That's not just a crime, it's evil." The weight of the judge's words, the way he condemned Malcolm for his betrayal. Malcolm's response, "I never wanted to hurt her. But we're desperate. We need that money to survive." Malcolm finally accepts responsibility for his actions, realizing he can no longer blame others for his choices. But then Malcolm revealed something that would change everything. "Your Honor, I have cancer. I'm dying. That's why we need the money." For my treatment, Malcolm was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Vanessa received 10 years for her role in the conspiracy. The insurance policy was voided, and I was awarded full custody of Caleb. The relief that filled me, the way I finally felt safe from their betrayal. The determination that filled me as I prepared to rebuild my life with Caleb. The moment of justice, the way Malcolm and Vanessa's plan had failed completely. The revelation that a grandmother successfully brought her own son to justice taps into universal themes of justice and family betrayal. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. 6 months later, as I watched my grandson flip pancakes in our kitchen, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. The morning sun streamed through my kitchen windows, casting warm light on the table where Caleb sat, his homework spread out before him. He looked different now, lighter, happier, like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Grandma," he said, looking up from his math problems, "can you help me with this equation?" I sat down beside him, the same spot where I'd sat with Malcolm when he was Caleb's age. But this time, there was no tension, no fear, no hidden agenda. Just a grandmother helping her grandson with his homework. As we worked through the math problem together, Caleb looked up at me. "Grandma," he said quietly, "do you ever miss Dad?" Malcolm at Caleb's age, sitting at this same table, asking for help with his homework. The contrast between the trusting child and the man who'd planned my murder. The peace that filled me now, the way I finally felt safe in my own home. The love I felt for Caleb, the way he'd chosen me over his parents, the way he'd risked everything to warn me. The weight of that question, the way Caleb was still processing what had happened to his family. My response: I miss the boy I raised, Caleb. But that boy doesn't exist anymore. The question of how Caleb will process his parents' betrayal creates tension. Will he be able to move forward? Will he be able to heal? Caleb nodded slowly. "I know what you mean," he said quietly. "I miss the parents I thought I had. But they were never real, were they?" The wisdom in Caleb's words, the way he'd processed what had happened to his family. My response: no, sweetheart. They were never real. But we are. And we're going to be okay. Caleb grows from confused child to wise young man, accepting the truth about his parents and choosing to move forward. As we finished his homework, Caleb looked at me with something that might have been gratitude. "Grandma," he said quietly, "thank you for protecting me. Thank you for choosing me over them." The weight of Caleb's words, the way he'd chosen me over his parents. My response: "I'll always choose you, Caleb. Always." The bond between us strengthened in that moment. We weren't just grandmother and grandson. We were allies in a fight for survival. But then Caleb revealed something that would change everything. "Grandma, I've been thinking, what if Dad really was sick? What if he was telling the truth about the cancer?" That evening, as we sat down to dinner together, I realized something powerful. We weren't just surviving, we were thriving. Caleb was doing well in school, making friends, building a new life. And I was finally free from the fear that had haunted me for years. The peace that filled me, the way I finally felt safe and happy. The determination that filled me as I prepared to build a new future with Caleb. The way we'd transformed from victims to survivors to thrivers. I evolved from victim to survivor to thriver, building a new life based on truth and love. As we cleared the table together, Caleb looked at me with something that might have been hope. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I think we're going to be okay." The weight of Caleb's words, the way he'd chosen hope over despair. My response: "I know we are, sweetheart. I know we are." The way we'd built a new life together, based on truth and love instead of lies and betrayal. The revelation that a grandmother and grandson successfully rebuilt their lives after betrayal taps into universal themes of resilience and family love. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. When I received a letter from Malcolm in prison, I discovered the truth about his cancer, and it would change everything I thought I knew about my son. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, 6 months after Malcolm's sentencing. The envelope was plain white, addressed in his familiar handwriting. I'd been expecting it, dreading it, wondering if I'd ever hear from him again. I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the envelope, wondering if I had the strength to read whatever was inside. I opened the letter slowly, my hands shaking. The first words hit me like a physical blow. Dear Mom, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to tell you the truth about everything. Malcolm, as a child, writing me letters from summer camp, telling me about his adventures. The same handwriting, but now filled with desperation instead of excitement. The weight of what I was about to read, the way I'd been dreading this moment for months. The determination that filled me as I prepared to face whatever truth Malcolm had to share. I know you think I'm a monster, and maybe I am, but I need you to understand why I did what I did. The cancer diagnosis was real, Mom. I found out 6 months before the dinner. The doctors gave me 2 years to live, maybe 3 with treatment. The question of whether Malcolm's cancer story is true creates tension. Is he lying again? Or is he finally telling the truth?
I didn't want to die, Mom.
I didn't want to leave Caleb without a father. I didn't want Vanessa to be alone. But the treatment costs were astronomical, and we were already drowning in debt. The desperation in Malcolm's words, the way he'd been backed into a corner by illness and financial ruin. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. Malcolm hadn't just decided to kill me on a whim. He'd been desperate, backed into a corner by cancer and medical bills. Malcolm reveals his true motivation, not greed, but desperation to survive and provide for his family. Vanessa's parents had already lost everything. We were living on borrowed time, borrowed money, borrowed hope. When the cancer diagnosis came, it felt like the final nail in our coffin. The weight of Malcolm's desperation, the way he'd been forced to choose between his own survival and his mother's life. The moral complexity of the situation, the way Malcolm's actions were both evil and understandable. The question of whether Malcolm's story is true creates tension. Is he finally being honest? Or is he still manipulating me? I know what I did was wrong, Mom. I know I betrayed your trust, your love, your life. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. I just loved my own survival more. The weight of Malcolm's apology, the way he'd finally accepted responsibility for his actions. My response, I don't know if I can forgive you, Malcolm, but I understand why you did it. I begin to understand the complexity of Malcolm's situation while still maintaining my boundaries. But then Malcolm revealed something that would change everything. Mom, there's something else. Vanessa was never sick. She made that up to pressure me into going through with the plan. As I finished reading the letter, I sat in silence, processing everything Malcolm had revealed. The cancer was real. The desperation was real. But so was the betrayal. The complexity of the situation, the way nothing was as simple as it had seemed. The determination that filled me as I prepared to decide how to respond to Malcolm's letter. The moral ambiguity of the situation, the way Malcolm's actions were both evil and understandable. The revelation that Malcolm's cancer was real, but Vanessa's illness was fake taps into universal themes of manipulation and desperation. But Malcolm had been planning this for months, and he wasn't about to give up. 1 year later, as I stood in my garden watching Caleb graduate from high school, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. The graduation ceremony was held in the school gymnasium, decorated with balloons and streamers, filled with proud parents and excited graduates. But I wasn't just proud, I was grateful. Grateful that Caleb had survived his parents' betrayal, grateful that he'd chosen to build a new life, grateful that we'd found peace together. As Caleb walked across the stage to receive his diploma, I thought of all the obstacles he'd overcome. The betrayal of his parents, the loss of his family, the trauma of discovering their plan. But he'd survived. He'd thrived. He'd chosen to move forward. After the ceremony, Caleb came to find me in the crowd. "Grandma," he said quietly, "I want to thank you for everything you've done for me." Caleb as a child, running to me with scraped knees, trusting me to make everything better. The same trust he'd shown when he'd chosen me over his parents. The pride I felt watching him graduate, the way he'd overcome every obstacle to reach this moment. The gratitude I felt for the life we'd built together, the peace we'd found after the storm. The weight of Caleb's words, the way he'd chosen to express his gratitude. My response: "You don't have to thank me, sweetheart. I love you. That's what family does." The question of what Caleb will do next creates tension. Will he go to college? Will he stay with me? Will he be able to build a new life? Caleb had been accepted to college on a full scholarship. He was planning to study psychology to help other children who'd been betrayed by their families. "I want to make sure no other kid has to go through what I went through," he said quietly. The wisdom in Caleb's words, the way he'd chosen to use his pain to help others. My response: "That's beautiful, sweetheart. You're going to make a difference in the world." Caleb evolves from victim to survivor to healer, choosing to use his experience to help others. That evening, as we sat in the living room together, Caleb handed me an envelope. "This is for you," he said quietly. "I wrote it a few months ago, but I wanted to give it to you today." The weight of the envelope, the way Caleb had chosen to express his feelings in writing. The letter inside: "Dear Grandma, thank you for choosing me over them.
Thank you for protecting me.
Thank you for loving me unconditionally. You're not just my grandmother, you're my hero." As I read Caleb's letter, tears streamed down my face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of joy. Joy that we'd survived, joy that we'd thrived, joy that we'd found peace together. The peace that filled me, the way I finally felt complete. My response: "You're my hero too, Caleb. You're my hero too." I finally accept that I'm not just a victim. I'm a hero who chose love over fear. But then Caleb revealed something that would change everything. "Grandma, I've been thinking, what if we visited Dad in prison? What if we tried to understand what happened?" As we sat together that evening, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself over someone else's expectations. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim. The wisdom I'd gained, the way I'd learned to choose love over fear. The determination that filled me as I prepared to share this story with others. The moral of the story: that sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. The revelation that a grandmother successfully rebuilt her life after betrayal taps into universal themes of resilience and family love. Sometimes the greatest act of love is saying no to those who would destroy you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself over someone else's expectations. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be a victim.